This video and all of its contents, including any opinions expressed by the narrator, are strictly for entertainment purposes only and is not intended in any way as a substitute for professional services and consultation from a licensed therapist, doctor, attorney, or other licensed professional service provider. Each person must make their own life decisions, and those decisions are theirs. Welcome back to Find Your Alpha, the channel that never uses computerized voices to read stories and never will. I'm back at you this week with another terrific video story, and you can see the title right on your screen. Caught my wife with a professional athlete, then sent her packing. Now let's get into this story and see what it's all about. He starts out and he says, a little over 12 years ago in early 2011, I came home unexpectedly one day and caught my now ex-wife with a former professional athlete. This was the lowest point in my life, which eventually gave rise to the best years that I'm living now. I'm not telling my story for sympathy or for accolades, but to inform, so take it for what it's worth. At the time, I had been married to my wife for over 19 years. We met in the 8th grade and started dating when I asked her to the prom during our junior year. From that night until the day I caught her cheating, we were a very happy couple. We got married at 21, right after I obtained my associate's degree and secured a job in my field. We had our first child 18 months later, our second 2 years after that, and our third a year later. I've always been the breadwinner in our family, and my wife was a stay-at-home mom. It's not that she never contributed financially, as she did work full-time in retail from the time she graduated high school right up until the birth of our first child. Her income really helped a lot when we were first starting out. After she got pregnant, we agreed it would be best if she became a devoted mother, as we both wanted our children to grow up in a traditional household. I thought our marriage was excellent right up until the day she cheated. What caused her to do what she did, I'll never know, but I believe it all started with the health scare she had a year prior. When we first married, my wife was in great shape, maybe even a little underweight for her height. She ate like a horse back then, but was so active she burned off more than she took in. With the birth of each of our children, she started putting on weight, peaking out at over 170 pounds. I want to make it clear I never once complained to my wife about how she looked. To me, she was beautiful no matter what she weighed. She was a great mom and wife, and that's all I cared about. In early 2010, she went in for a checkup and found out that her fasting blood sugar was sky high, he says. This was a wake-up call for us, so I helped her improve her diet and encouraged her to get back to the gym. After she did, she started shedding weight in a healthy way, and after 4 months had lost nearly 30 pounds. By the time she went back to see her doctor for a follow-up appointment, she was down over 40 pounds and her blood sugar was back to the normal range. We were all relieved and she looked great. After that, she began getting more serious about her fitness and started working out with a female trainer. Now, when I first read this story, I thought, uh-oh, she's going to be hooking up with this female trainer, but as you'll see, that's not the case. In addition to cardio, she started bag boxing and weight training. After a few months of this, she was in the best shape of her life and looked like a fitness model even though she was nearly 40. So remember that, she's nearly 40. I was very proud of her and so were my kids. During the entire time, she never neglected her family and remained a wonderful wife and mother. I actually think this is when she was her best self. She was feeling good and had a lot of confidence. I was thrilled about her new healthy lifestyle and enjoyed the many fringe benefits of being married to a beautiful woman. Things were really good for us back then, and my career was taking off. I too was in good shape as I've always been an active person and eat reasonably well. My kids were all athletes, so they were in great shape too. All in all, we were the idealized version of what a happy and healthy suburban family would look like. Prior to D-Day, there were no warning signs that anything was wrong. As I said before, things were great, and that's what made the whole thing so disturbing. I remember the day like it was yesterday. My wife and I woke up at 5:30 like we always did. We drank our coffee and had breakfast together in the kitchen and talked about what we were going to do that evening. Before I left for work, she gave me a big kiss and told me she loved me like she always did. At the time, she was going to the gym 4 times a week and was scheduled to go that day. On her gym day, she usually left the house around 10 and would come home famished and eat her lunch. Well, on this day, as he's going to find out, she's actually having something else for lunch. Back then, my office was nearly an hour from the house, so I rarely ever came back home once I left for work. This day was different because I ended up meeting a customer in the field. He originally was supposed to come to our office but called last minute and said he couldn't make the drive, so I arranged to meet him halfway. The location he chose just happened to be near my house. After our meeting, I remember being on top of the world. I called my boss to tell her we got the contract and to let her know I was going to work from home for the rest of the day. When I got to my house, there was a red Mercedes sports car parked in the middle of my driveway, so I couldn't pull in. I didn't recognize the car and didn't expect my wife to be home from the gym so early. I wonder what's going on. I parked on the street and walked up to my garage door and saw my wife's Jeep was in there. I thought the person with the car might be someone she knew from the gym, perhaps her trainer. I entered the house through the front door and it was unlocked, which was very unusual. There were no lights on and my wife was nowhere in sight. I was about to call out to her when I heard a loud rustling coming from upstairs. I thought we were being robbed as my wife kept her jewelry and a few $100s in cash in our closet. I went over to my safe and retrieved one of my pistols and headed up the stairs with a magazine loaded. As I got closer to the bedroom, I heard the muffled voice of a man and my wife squealing something. Oh, this poor guy. At this point, I still thought it was a robbery. As I got closer to the door, I recognized what the sounds were. The door was open, and when I looked inside, I saw my wife and a semi-famous former athlete having S on our bed. I won't get any more descriptive than that, but the scene was graphic and something no husband should ever have to witness. Can you imagine coming home and finding that? I don't know how I kept it together, but I did. Instead of using my weapon, I reached for my phone and started snapping pictures. Though the phone was clicking, they didn't hear it as they were too enthralled with each other. After I had enough pics, I walked into the room with my weapon at my side and said, "What's going on here?" Hearing this, the guy sprung backwards like a kangaroo and landed squarely on his ass. His eyes were full of fear as he looked at me and at the weapon at my side. My wife was in a daze and said nothing for a few seconds. She grabbed one of the pillows and put it in front of her, then ran into the bathroom, locking the door behind her. A few seconds later, I heard the shower running. So this woman is complete garbage. I mean, not only did she cheat on her husband, but she also just left her husband there alone with this AP, and who knows what was going to happen. You would think that she would try to diffuse the situation, but she didn't care. All she's thinking about is herself and her self-preservation. I turned to face the guy and gave him a chilling stare. He started pleading with me and I told him to shut his mouth and get out of my house. He said yes sir and went for his clothes. I told him to pick up his clothes and get out. He asked if he could at least put on his pants and I told him if he wanted to leave there with all his body parts, he better leave now. Yeah, this AP should be wanting to get out of there as quickly as possible without pausing at all. And now we're at a point in this story where I want to remind you, if you like what you've heard so far, make sure you hit that like button. Now let's get back to the story. He complied and bolted down the steps with his clothes and shoes in hand. A few seconds later, I heard a loud crash. I looked out and saw that he had backed into a large oak tree across the street. The back bumper, trunk, and tailpipe of his car were severely damaged, while the tree appeared to suffer little beyond some missing bark. My next door neighbor just happened to be outside while the guy was leaving and took down his plate number before he drove away. She also witnessed him run out of my house without clothes and get into his car before backing into the tree. She later told me she thinks he was trying to put on his pants while backing out and his foot got stuck on the gas. As I was talking to my next door neighbor, my other neighbors came out to talk to us because they all heard the crash. I was really worked up and was a bundle of nervous energy at that point. Rather than make something up, I came right out and told them I had just caught my wife in bed with this guy and identified him by name. They were all shocked and didn't know what to say to me. They all told me they were very sorry, comforted me, and asked if I needed anything. I remember telling them that I'd be all right and that I wouldn't do anything stupid. The neighbor whose tree got hit considered calling the police but decided not to since there was little damage to the tree. He also thought they wouldn't do anything anyway since the guy was so well known in the area. After I finished talking to them, I headed back in the house and started rethinking whether I should have told them what happened, though at that point it was too late for second guessing. I planned on confronting my wife, but she was still locked in the bathroom with the shower running. I knocked on the door and called out to her, but she didn't answer. You know why? Because you caught her flat footed, and now she's in there concocting some kind of story that she's going to tell you. I thought about unlocking the door and going in, but instead I decided to leave the house. Before driving off, I called my mother in law and told her I caught her daughter in bed with this guy. She reacted with disbelief at first and then with anger. She told me she was coming right over. I advised her I was leaving and wouldn't be there when she arrived. I told her I'd like her to take my wife back to her house as I needed time to think. She agreed and told me not to worry, saying she would drag her out of there by her hair if she refused to leave. I always had a great relationship with my mother-in-law as well as with my father-in-law when he was still alive. That afternoon, I picked up my kids from school and told them everything that happened when we got home. I explained their mom was going to be staying with grandma until I figured things out. Now you may question whether telling them so soon was the right thing to do, but I think it was. At the time, they were all teenagers and knew about relationships and right from wrong. I also wanted them to hear the truth and not some sugar-coated or watered-down version from their mother. I think that's smart. The next day I went to work as I had some things I needed to get done. I told my boss what happened and requested a week off so I could get my life in order. She was fine with this and told me to take all the time I needed. The following day, I met with an attorney and got the ball rolling on a separation agreement as I wasn't sure at that point if I wanted a divorce. It was then I found out that in our state, the government makes you wait 6 months before you can file for divorce. What right does the government have to dictate what people do in their personal lives? I apologize for digressing here, but this was something that really bothered me. See what I tell you about always checking the state laws before you get married? In any case, we got the separation agreement in place and my wife moved back home 8 days later. I moved into the basement where we had our family room and a spare bedroom. It's a walkout basement with a prep kitchen and has an attached patio. This is where we spent most of our time as a family, so living down there wasn't much of a sacrifice. In the agreement, I specified the space was mine to occupy during the separation and that my wife was not to enter unless I granted her permission. During the time my wife spent at her mother's house, she avoided me and our kids. According to her, she was too embarrassed to face us and was hoping that we would reach out to her, which we never did. Instead, I had my attorney contact her and present the separation agreement, which she quickly signed because she desperately wanted to come home to her family. When she came home, I think she thought she could just apologize and we forgive her and things would go back to the way they were. Of course, that didn't happen with either me or my kids. Upon her return, we had a family meeting and I laid out what our living arrangement would be and how things would go during the separation period. The kids had a few questions and then I let my wife say her piece. She apologized and begged for our forgiveness and then started crying, which caused my kids to cry. It was emotional, but I remained unmoved, and my kids, seeing how I responded, quickly stopped crying and regained their composure. It was at that moment when I think my wife fully understood the gravity of the situation and that things would never be the same again. She then went into panic mode. The next morning, she gave me a letter of apology describing what happened and what led up to it. According to her, she had been feeling bad about herself for years and was becoming more and more isolated and was ashamed because of her weight. After losing the weight, she was feeling really good about herself, and having a celebrity show interest in her was totally unexpected and irresistible to her. So here's a perfect example of attention and validation and how that's irresistible to a woman, especially when she views the man as being a high value man. She said she never meant for this to happen and that he had been flirting with her for weeks at the gym. Well, if he was flirting with you for weeks at the gym, you could have shut that down very easily, so that's not an excuse. They started talking and one thing led to another and they ended up at our house after working out one day to have S. Isn't it amazing how in all these stories they say, oh, one thing led to another? No, one thing didn't lead to another. You enabled it to lead to another, and that's how you got in that situation. She claims it was only twice, including the time I caught her, and that it was only a physical attraction. This didn't matter to me, and in fact, it made me think less of her as a person. Yeah, when they use that whole line about, oh, it meant nothing or it was just physical, like that's supposed to make you feel better. I really wasn't interested in hearing the details, but it was good to find out what caused her to go from a loving wife and mother to a lying, untrustworthy cheater in a matter of days. After reading the letter, I realized she was a different person from the woman I married, and I had deep animus towards her. I told her that night that I planned to file for divorce and that she should get a lawyer. She pleaded with me to give her another chance, but I told her I had absolutely no interest in doing so. Good for you, mister. From that night until the day our divorce was finalized, she rarely left the house unless it was to visit her mother or go to the store. She spent most of her time locked up in her bedroom and eating. As a result, she gained back much of the weight she had lost the previous year. Yeah, if you're not moving around and you're just feeding yourself like that, you're going to be gaining weight very quickly. Throughout the separation period, she continuously apologized and offered me everything to get me to stay. She told me over and over how she wished she hadn't done what she did. Now listen to this. In her mind, she felt me seeing them together was the reason I couldn't get past this and was unwilling to work through it. I told her that was nonsense, as I still would have divorced her even if I didn't catch them in the act. One of my go-to comeback statements I'd tell her when I was sick of talking was, "You lost your family, but hey, at least you can always say you got effed by a professional athlete." Ooh, that's a sharp one. This would shut her up and send her off crying, which is all I wanted at the time. My kids, on the other hand, were always respectful and loving towards their mother, but her relationship with them has never been the same. In the end, we all made it through. I'm now remarried to a former boss babe who decided at the age of 36 she was done with corporate life and wanted to raise a family. We met, fell in love, and married 2 years later. That was 7 years ago. We now have two little ones under the age of 4. It's not where I expected to be at 51, but I love my life now and wouldn't trade it for everything. So he's 51 now. Oh yeah, so he got married at 21. He was married for 19 years, and this all happened with his ex-wife 11 years ago. So 11 plus 19, that's 30, so that would put him at 51. All three of my older kids have graduated college and are out on their own. My oldest is getting married next summer. Since they are all adults now, I rarely see or hear from my ex. She's back working for a national department store chain. She recently moved in with a guy who she had been dating for the past 4 years. He works for the Postal Service and they met through Weight Watchers. Now, I didn't know Weight Watchers was for men, so you learn something every day. They both have struggled with their weight over the years. He's a widower in his late 60s, so his wife is like 51, and now she's hooking up with this guy in his late 60s. My kids told me he's retiring next year. He goes on, he says when he does, he plans on selling his house, and he and my ex are going to travel in his RV. I wish them well, as I'm long over the animosity I once felt for her. As for the washed up former athlete, years of hard living and reckless spending have caught up with him. After our divorce, I planned to file a civil suit against him for breaking up my marriage, but decided not to after my attorney looked into it. When she did, she discovered that he had filed Chapter 7 bankruptcy on 2 LLCs he owned earlier that year, and he himself had recently entered into Chapter 13 bankruptcy. According to his filing, he listed less than $25,000 in assets and over $900,000 in liabilities. How does someone who made over $15 million playing profession sports end up in this situation? Now, he meant to say professional sports there. This guy, as you can see, made a lot of spelling errors and left out words throughout this story, so just bear with me as I'm reading this. He now lives in Central Florida, and I heard he's once again buried in debt and is getting sued by everyone. The guy has problems. Also, I saw a recent picture of him from a celebrity golf tournament. He's pushing 60 now, but looks more like he's 80 due to the effects of arthritis and years of hard living. So I wonder what sport this guy played. Before I sign off, I'd like to give one piece of advice to all the young men out there who might read this. My advice is to get married and have children, even if your marriage doesn't survive. And today, that's highly likely. You will always have your kids and your bloodline. To me, that's a million times more valuable than all the money and free time I'd have if I was single and child free. Truth be told, the powers that be want to divide men and women to reduce the world population. They want men and women to hate each other and fund extreme movements on both sides to keep us apart and fighting. Don't let them win. Society as we know it will cease to exist if things do not change. And that's the end of his story. And I think this guy handled the situation well. He was cool, he was level headed, he took immediate action, he divorced his wife, he moved on with his life, and now he has a brand new family. So things for him, it sounds like, turned out very well. And he also makes some very interesting points here at the end. Now, I agree with many of his points that he listed out here at the very end. The only one I don't agree with, as you all know, is that I'm not a proponent of marriage. And the only reason that I'm not is because the laws are set up against men in the United States and most Western countries. But his other points I think are well taken. Now, let's take a look at some of the responses he got from the community. The first one is from a woman. She says, I agree with you on the part about having children. My husband was a serial cheater, and like a fool, I ended up staying married to him for 24 years until I finally woke up. You know who woke me up? My kids. They had an intervention with me and convinced me to leave him after years of infidelity. It was the best thing I ever did, and my life has been happy and drama-free ever since. I'm glad you too found happiness. Well, good for this woman. She should have kicked her husband out and divorced him a long time ago when she first caught him cheating. Next, here's a response from a guy. He says, in addition to the cheating, the thing that told me all I needed to know about your wife was the fact she locked herself in the bathroom after you caught her and then went to her mother's house and never once reached out to you or her kids. That tells me she's nothing more than a selfish narcissist, and you should be thankful you got away from her when you did. She likely has always been a cheater, and this probably wasn't her first rodeo. Here's another response from a woman. She says, I can relate to this story as I was married to a retired athlete for 3 years and experienced something similar but from a different perspective. Him being twice divorced should have been a red flag, but I was attracted by his fame and flamboyant lifestyle. There's an example of hypergamy. Turns out he was a cheater and was completely broke. Our marriage was horrible and we were hounded by creditors daily. You'd be surprised how many former professional athletes are in this condition, because what happens with them, they go through their money like that money's going to keep coming in forever. But if you know anything about professional sports, your career, unless you're like a Tom Brady or somebody, is going to be just a few years. And you're going to make a ton of money. And then after that, as soon as your career's over, guess what? The money stops coming in. And finally, we've got another response from a guy. He says, thank you for sharing your story. I admire your composure, as I don't think I could have kept my anger in check. I didn't catch my ex in the act, but found out by getting access to her chat and email messages. I divorced her and moved out of state. We were young and thankfully didn't have any kids. That was 5 years ago, and she still messages me every few months just to touch base and see how I'm doing. I never respond. Well, good. You shouldn't be responding to her, and you should block her. So those are some of the responses he got. And now I want to take a look at what I think are some of the morals of the story. The first one, if you are in a relationship, don't be completely predictable. And I've pointed this out in many previous stories. How many of these situations does the husband or the boyfriend find out about cheating when he comes home unexpectedly, either from work or from a business trip, and then finds his wife or girlfriend with someone? Don't be completely predictable. Next, an idle mind is the devil's workshop. Remember, she was a stay-at-home mom, and there's nothing wrong with that, and I really applaud a lot of women that do a good job being stay-at-home mothers and raising their kids. But what happens is, once the kids get older, and he said when she cheated, all the kids were in their teens, remember that? So now she doesn't have anything to do. So she's at home, she's just sitting around the house, nothing to occupy her mind, and look what happens. Next, attention and validation are irresistible for many women, especially when that woman views the man or perceives him as being a high-value man, as she did with this former athlete. And related to that is the next point, hypergamy is instinctive. Now, she didn't say that or admit to it in this story, But I'm sure deep inside her brain, she was thinking, hey, this former athlete might be a better choice for me long term than my husband. Next, opportunity often reveals one's true character when it comes to cheating. Now, I'm assuming that this was the only time this woman cheated, although I highly doubt that based on how she reacted. But let's just give her that this was the only time. But you see what happened there when she was put into a situation where the opportunity presented itself, she took the opportunity, which tells me, guess what? She's always been a cheater. Next point, control the message and inform everyone about the infidelity. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, and you can make sure that everybody knows the truth and not allow your wife or your girlfriend to go out there and spin a different story. And finally, learn to live within your means and make investing for your financial future and independence a top priority. I always say that life is like a three-legged stool. You've got to have good mental health, good physical health, and good financial health to have a successful life. And oftentimes, a person will neglect one of those three legs on the stool. Some people neglect all three and then it just collapses for them. Everything collapses, almost like this athlete. So you need to make sure that you're strong mentally, physically, and financially to be successful. So those are my thoughts, and now I want to hear from you. What did you think of this story, and how do you think this guy handled the situation? Would you have done what he did, or would you have done something completely different? Tell us about it in the comments. Also, be sure to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to this channel, and I will talk to you on the next one.